The views expressed on this episode, as with all episodes of We Hate Your Baby Daddy, are based solely on our personal opinions and shit we heard in the streets.
The content here should not be taken as indisputable fact. This show is for entertainment purposes only, so enjoy and don't come for us.
Hey guys, welcome back to We Hate Your Baby Daddy. It's me, Brie, a solo act today, and I wanted to quickly say thank you so much to all of our listeners and fans of the show who have been writing in, supporting us. You know, me and Dee were two busy single moms, but we love to make the show. We have so much fun making the show. But, we are super busy, and that's why Dee isn't here today, but she will be in next week's episode. So that means this week's episode is going to be another historical one. So if you're not really super interested in that, totally understand if you want to skip this one. But if you're like me and you're kind of a history nerd, you might be interested in this episode. So today we're going to talk about Henry VIII, a man who had 3 quote unquote legitimate children, countless illegitimate children, but 6 wives. All right, so let's hop into it. So, just to warn you, Henry VIII, this is a topic that I have been interested in for years. I have researched for years, so I don't want to get too into the weeds because I can't. I have read so many nonfiction historical books about the man, about the wives, about his kids, about the Church of England. I mean, just because to me it's so interesting. I mean, he was a freaking weirdo in so many ways, which we will get into. So, Henry VIII, so he was around in the 1500s. He was the King of England. He, as most royal men do, they're expected to marry. So the thing about Henry, though, he was not the first in line to the throne. He actually had a brother, but his brother died, I believe, in his teens. And at the time that he died, he was actually betrothed to Catherine of Aragon, who was then moved over to, marry Henry, because they were like, well, we can't just send her back to Spain, with Arthur being dead. They were like, well, let's just move her on down the line. I mean, that's how women were back in the 1500s, basically just trade them from one brother to the next. Anywho, so Henry's like, yeah, whatever. I mean, Catherine was hot. She was from Spain. She was a foreigner. He was intrigued. And they were married for a long time. They were married for almost 30 years. And they had a pretty decent relationship. If you look at the historical records from the time, I mean, you can't always really trust what people say, because there was just a lot of they called it courtly love, and not Courtney Love, not the person who sings Hole. It's courtly love, which is where you kind of have to just have a public face and a public image and public perception, even though you might privately feel differently. And we'll dive into that as well, because that is a huge theme throughout Henry's reign, is when people feeling a certain type of way about him, and not expressing that. So the thing about his marriage to Catherine, so it only produced one child, and that was Mary. And Mary would grow up and go on to become Queen Mary. They also called her Bloody Mary. And the reason why she became Bloody Mary is actually interesting. If you go back and you look at Henry's relationship with Catherine. So, Catherine, she was from Spain. She was Catholic. And Henry, he was from England, so he was a member of the Church of England, which, was under like papal like rule. So the Pope, made the decisions and everything. But when he decided he wanted to divorce Catherine, which was not a thing, you didn't get divorced, especially if you're Catholic. Like, come on. And the Pope would not allow it. He's like, I'm sorry, but I talked to God. God's not into it, bro. You got to stay married. Henry was so powerful. He was like, well, you know what? I am taking over the Church of England. It's my church now. And I say that divorce is legal. And everybody was kind of confused, right? I mean, they're all Catholic to some degree, but you also have to be loyal to the king. And that's kind of where Protestants come from, in case you're curious. But see, this is the kind of thing where I'm like, I don't want to get too much into the weeds. But you can see why when Queen Mary grew up and became queen, and she had the Spanish Inquisition, which was where she would basically go have her soldiers go around asking people, so, like, are you Catholic? Oh, you're not? Kill him. And that's why she became Bloody Mary. I mean, she killed a lot of people because some people were like, well, no, I'm not Catholic. Like, do I have to be? And as they were finishing that sentence, she was having them killed. Anyway, he was really cruel to Catherine. Basically, it came down to she couldn't give him a son. And I believe during that time, he, of course, as a king and a dude, had like several affairs that, some of them did produce sons. But with the way that things were back then, which it doesn't really make any sense, the rules they choose to follow and the rules that they didn't. But he couldn't acknowledge them. They couldn't be in line for the throne, which is like ordained by God, blah, 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 the bloodline. Anyway, so he was like, he at one point, I believe, even imprisoned Catherine. And I believe Mary, his daughter, his first daughter, had to like hang out in the Tower Green with her, just chilling. Eventually, he kind of put her in just like a casual kind of royal jail. Like she had, I think, at least one staff member, and she like lived out the rest of her days just kind of like locked away from society. And he actually ended up moving on and marrying somebody who was in her court. And so, you have a court of people around you. You have your ladies in waiting, who kind of like serve at your interests. They all represent different families. And so the woman that he married next, her name was Anne Boleyn. And, he has a daughter with her. The daughter that he has with her is named Elizabeth. And Elizabeth also goes on to be Queen Elizabeth I. And the interesting thing about Anne is that Anne also had a sister. Her name was Mary. And rumor has it, I mean, it's not really rumor, like it's kind of a fact, but Henry was also smashing her sister, and he impregnated her like over and over and over again. Like, and apparently the reason why he chose to marry Anne instead of her sister Mary, even though, he already knocked her up, was because, so complicated, right? But Mary was married. She had a husband of her own, but the husband, was like, oh, well, the king wants you. Well, I can't say no to the king. Like, I guess you're his now. And, again, because of these made up social rules, he's like, well, I can't wife her up. And Anne, who was known as being a virgin, was seen as a more suitable person that he could marry. And I guess he thought, oh, well, I've knocked Mary up so many times, I feel like she'll be just as fertile. And it's just so messed up, like how they look at women. And he claims, he was so in love with her, and he was betrothed to her, but the church was still kind of like, you can't just push your first wife to the side. Like, you cannot just do that. But, he's out here making his own rules, which was, again, weird in some ways, making your own rules. And then other ways, you were just like, oh, gotta follow the rules. But anyway, he did end up just saying, my first wife, that marriage is annulled. Now I'm marrying Anne, and there's not shit you can do about it. They actually ended up having like a secret wedding, kind of cowardly, but whatever. Eventually, like I said, she did get pregnant. She had a couple of miscarriages, and then she ended up having Elizabeth. But after some time, he just felt like, she was playing in his face. Like, he was accusing her of like cheating. He accused her of cheating on him with her own brother, which is gross. And I'm not even going to acknowledge that rumor. But once again, he had her imprisoned, and Elizabeth would go to hang out in the Tower Green, or Tower of London, I believe it was known. Once again, you're having your own child be imprisoned with her mom because, there was a question of Elizabeth's legitimacy. Like, oh, well, if your mom is like is a bewitching witch who's out here cheating, then, like, should I even claim you as a kid? Awful, right? So while while Anne was dealing with miscarriages and, like, trying to raise Elizabeth, Henry was already cheating on her with the woman who would be his next wife, who was also in Anne's court. And that's why back then it's like, you have to be really careful about who's in your court. And, all these different powerful families, like, you'll see these names pop up in the story. So you'll have like the Boleyns, the Howards, the Seymours, of the world, who, they just kind of, these wealthy families who kind of surround the king. The king gives them land that they run, and then they have serfs that pay them. They pay taxes like to them. Pretty messed up form of what is it, like capitalism? I don't know. Let's not get into that. The point is that he eventually had Anne Boleyn beheaded. Like, he had her arrested, sent away. She was tried before a jury, quote unquote, and then just had her beheaded. Claimed that she was like committing adultery, incest, and plotting to kill him. I mean, I don't believe any of that is true. Regardless of that, like, before she's even cold in the ground, he moves on with Jane Seymour. So Jane Seymour becomes the queen. And I really felt like, honestly, at this point, Henry's like, that whole taking over the church thing was so complicated. I think it's a lot easier to get rid of a wife by just accusing her of all this stuff. Like, who's going to check me? Nobody cares about women, which is just so fucked up. So he goes on to marry Jane Seymour. And I will not get into like too much of that. Like, they were not married very long, because she gave birth to his only legitimate son, and he went on to become King Edward the Sixth. Yeah, Edward the Sixth. And she died actually after having him, but I don't think Henry like gave a single fuck. The thing is, like, the whole point for them was like, we have to have as many sons as possible, because look what happened with him. His brother Arthur died, and he was the spare, and he needed to have, you always have to have an heir and a spare, and that's what they call like Prince William and the ugly one. What's the ugly one's name? I don't know. We're not talking about them. But anyway, so Jane Seymour, they were only together like a year and some change before she died. So we're on 4 women now, by the way, the 4th one being Anne of Cleves. So technically, they weren't really married. She was German. She comes over from Cleves to be with Henry. And he had seen like a painting of her prior. And I'm sure that she has seen plenty of paintings of him as he's the king. And she comes over, and, a lot of people aren't at this point, so prepared to just hand over their daughter to this dude. Because you see, I mean, there was not very high standards for keeping a wife back then. But, I mean, they see that he imprisons them and cuts off their fucking heads. So he finally, gets this woman from Germany. And after 6 months, I guess they just said, it's not working. And he claims, there's like a rumor that he was saying, oh, she was ugly and too German and gross. But I think the reality is that she came and was like, ew. Like, she looked around and she was like, this place is trash. And so he was just like, fine, I won't cut off your head. Like, let's just be bro and sis. And he actually called her like the king's beloved sister. And she moved into like an apartment in England. And she just kind of hung out like for the rest of her life, she actually outlived Henry VIII. Pretty cool, huh? So the next wife number 5, after Anne of Cleves. So the thing about Henry at this point, Henry would have been, I believe, in like his 40s, and little Kitty Howard, Catherine Howard, she was actually Anne Boleyn's like cousin. The Howards and the Boleyns were related. And she was like 15 when they got married. And at this point, Henry is old. He had like a old hunting injury that never really healed properly. Apparently from people's like secret private writings, he like stank. He was overweight. Like he couldn't even ride a horse without the horse buckling under his weight. Like he would just sit and like feast and eat because he just couldn't do anything because his leg was injured. And so her father just was like, well, maybe he won't cut your head off. And guess what? They were wrong. These two, little Kitty Howard and Henry VIII, I believe they were only married for like a year and some change before she like befell the same fate that Anne Boleyn went through. He claims that she cheated on him and committing adultery and just like treasonous behavior, and she was banging her cousin Thomas Culpeper. Like, again, she was a child with no choice but to marry this like ugly old man. And so he had her quote unquote tried before a jury, and she was 19 years old. He sent her off to the Tower of London, where he sent off all of his wives for the most part, and had her beheaded as well. They did not have any kids. I don't even know if it even got to that point. And so finally, the last wife was Catherine Parr. And they didn't have any kids, but Catherine Parr is kind of a badass bitch because towards the end of their relationship before he died, well, actually, no, let's back up a little bit. So Catherine Parr, he was her 4th husband. So she had already been married, or no, I'm sorry, 3rd husband. She had already been married twice before she got to Henry, and she was only like in her 20s. And towards the end of the relationship, he was already looking at her like suspiciously, like, I don't know about you. Like, I think I want to have you beheaded too, And luckily, he died before it could get to that point. And so at this point, I mean, she was pretty young. She was actually like the same age as, his first daughter, Henry's first daughter, Mary. And so she kind of had a good relationship with those 3 kids, Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward. She made sure that they got educated, which was a big deal because for Queen Elizabeth, when she went on to become queen, that was like a huge thing for her, was education. She was actually the first woman to publish an original work under her own name in English in England. Pretty cool fact. And then she also helped pass an act that said, like, even though, Mary's mom, that their marriage was annulled, and Elizabeth, her mom, unfortunately was beheaded, even though all that stuff went down, they still have a legitimate, claim to the throne. Like, so she cared. Like, she was a cool stepmom. The point of all of this, though, is that, you see what kind of a man and what kind of a world this baby daddy lived in, where everyone catered to him to the point where, they just give you a wife. They're like, even when people are scared to marry you, we'll find one, we'll make a way. I feel like poor Anne of Cleves came over from Germany, and she's like, so what happened to her head? What happened to their heads? You did what? And she's like, I'm not trying to do this. And I don't blame her, because he's scary. And these men kept pushing their daughters on to Henry because they want that power. Because if your daughter is the Queen of England, you get more land, title, money, power for lineage. Your lineage goes on forever with this generational wealth. I mean, there are families in England that are not even distantly related to these original families. You see someone like what's the ugly Prince William, Prince William's wife if you probably do like a deep dive on her Wikipedia page, you can probably trace her lineage back to like one of these families that were in Henry VIII's court. They take this stuff very seriously as far as like legitimate heirs. I mean, like I said, Henry had a lot of mistresses. He had a lot of babies on the side. Some of them were even named after him. He has a bunch of kids named like Henry the Bastard, like running around because he was just like, well, I wasn't married to your mom, and that's the one rule of our time that I'm gonna follow. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. But that was the world back then, and I mean, honestly, even to this day, you kind of see how people treat men when it comes to their whims. Like, you don't want to fall afoul of the patriarchy, or you will lose your head. And so that's the episode. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you want, I can go into a deep dive about him, like a little bit deeper, or about some of the wives, or about some of the kids. Like, I could talk about this forever. It's a really interesting topic to me. And plenty of the royals are weird like this. One terrible baby and daddy I would never want to talk about is King Charles. Ew. And you guys know what I mean. Like, the whole tampon thing. No thanks. But I wanted to say thank you so much for listening. And I wanted to ask if you could please give us a 5-star review. On Spotify, you just click those 5 little stars. You can also answer the Q&A. It always asks, like, oh, what did you think about this episode? We also have polls after every show that you can vote on a topic. In the Larry Hillblom episode I did, I really wanted to know, like, do you guys think he's alive or dead? Like, so please vote in the polls. You can follow us on Instagram at WHY Baby Daddy Pod. We also have TikTok, same thing, Why Baby Daddy Pod, where we just post like a couple random videos. And also, I'm really excited to announce that we're going to be doing a giveaway soon of merchandise. I'm not going to tell you what it is. You're going to have to wait and see. But it's going to be great. So we're going to give it away to one of our loyal fans. I'm going to make a post on Instagram explaining how our giveaway works. And then we're going to launch the merch actually to celebrate our 10th episode. So I believe this is number 6, 7. Listen, I can't count. But for our 10th episode, we're going to release the merch. So I'm really, really excited to show you guys what that is. Oh, and also, we've been getting reviews on Apple Podcasts, which is major. So thank you so much for those 5-star reviews and those nice little messages. They like warm our hearts and they keep us wanting to do this show. So that's all for now. Talk to you next time. Bye.